Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new fact-filled, exciting episode of the Patty and Michael Show. It's all about living in Prince Edward Island. Our topic today, as usual, is all about real estate and some other tidbits about the island. Today, we're coming to you live, recorded, of course, from the Charlottetown waterfront, where it's an absolutely beautiful day. There's a ton of sailboats and yachts in front of us. And even though it's only, 9 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, there's people everywhere. It's a great day in PEI. Patty, how are things?
Things are good. And yes, it's absolutely gorgeous down here today. And I am a little surprised at how much activity. There's people fishing off the pier. And yesterday we had a cruise ship here, which was kind of exciting. You see lots of traffic and tourists walking around, taking in the sights that Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island offers.
And people fishing off the pier, and hopefully you don't get a fish hook in your head when you're walking around.
Exactly.
Patty, I have a question for you. So we're doing our episode, A Week in the Life of a Real Estate Agent, which really I think we're going to stop doing this week because this could have been 50 pages long. I had to stop after the first day. So just some of the things I've ran across. And the first one is a question for you. The question is, how many water tests, if any, do you need to do if you're buying a cottage in a cottage community?
Well, first answer I would say is 1. Typically, that's how our agreement of purchase and sales are written, and that's what most people would say.
But this cottage is on a community water system.
Oh, well, a community water system.
Yes, there's a
different
twist.
So in that case, I would say, again, and I've been guilty, just 1, but I bet the answer is 2.
Why do we have to do, or let me rephrase that, do we need to do a water test at all for anything we're buying? Is it a requirement of the conveyance or the sale?
If it is a private cottage and you are getting funding from a lender, yes.
Typically.
You
can negate that condition, especially if it's the middle of winter and everything's frozen. A lot of times the bank will allow you to purchase a cottage or a house without a water test. How do I put this? You don't need a water test. Water test is a requirement of the mortgage holder if there's a mortgage. The water test consists of 2 elements. What are they?
Bacteria and chemical analysis.
So bacteria would be like a bunch of bugs got into your well, an example of that. And chemical would be runoff from a farmer's field. Any other examples?
No, that's typically sewage if you're...
Septic tank infiltration, which is never nice.
Yes. Saltwater intrusion if it's a waterfront property.
Salinity.
And that's been typically, we have in our chemical, have seen in certain areas on the island, arsenic, which I think we covered in another podcast that we did specifically on water.
There's 2 tests, bacteria and chemical. Right now, as far as I know, if they're continuing the program, water tests are free. A water test, in my opinion, should be done by a plumber. Would you agree?
Should be by a third party who does not have a vested interest in the sale of the property as per our contracts.
Right. And it shouldn't be the owner's name, obviously, because they're biased and prejudicial involved in the transaction. So a plumber, to me, is probably the best person to hire. When you're in a community system, there's a little bit of a twist in that the community... I guess I should first say, why is there a community system? There's a community system for one of 2 reasons. The first one is highly likely, and the second one less likely. Highly likely they had problems finding decent water, or there's environmental concerns where they don't want people drilling a bunch of holes in that particular area. Less likely is they put it in as a luxury feature. You're typically not going to see a developer spend a bunch of money just so people don't have to put a well in, which in PEI is not overly expensive. When you buy a cottage in a community, they will typically offer the water certificates to the people living in that community, either directly or sometimes they have a website like the Hebrides, for instance, and a lot of other websites or a lot of other subdivisions have websites. But they will sometimes only meet the minimum requirements for the government, which is to do one test. I can't remember. I think it's bacteria or biological, isn't it?
I believe it's just the bacteria.
They do the bacteria, but they don't do their chemical, which to me is an oxymoron. You know, it's like bringing your car in to have it inspected for safety, and you ask them just to inspect the driver's side, but don't look at the passenger side.
Yeah, good point.
So when you buy a cottage in a community, you have the water test that's already done at the well, or sometimes there's a series of wells, which they'll do multiple water tests. So those certificates are available, but you usually don't get both. Now, on our contracts, when you're purchasing, it says that the water test is to be done on the premises, blah, 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 goes on for a long paragraph. Should I still have that water test clause in there if I'm buying a cottage?
I would say yes, but I would be putting in an additional one if it's on a communal well system, because I see where this is going.
Where is it going? Because I'm lost.
My interpretation, I think, is and again, it's kind of exciting when you bring up topics like this, Michael, that it's almost like a little riddle puzzle. And I've been guilty of not doing this in the past, but if I'm representing a buyer and it is on a communal well system, there should be 2 water tests done. One taken at where the well point is, and the second one, because like you had said, it's usually the way our contracts are written at the property itself. But what if there was somewhere along the lines, no pun intended, some sort of contamination or something that happens while it's being fed to a particular property? I think what I'm understanding, perhaps what you're saying, is there probably should be 2 water tests done. One at the community well, the communal well pump where the well is, and one at the residence. Am I understanding that correctly?
You're understanding it correctly, and not to beat this to death. I think the number one priority is if you're taking a mortgage, what are the requirements of the mortgage? Will they accept the community test? If so, that's fine. You can use that. You can move ahead. You can get the deal closed. If you're risk adverse or paranoid or super safe and you just want to make sure you're drinking clean water, what I said to Patty earlier is she indicated that, cities like Charlottetown or Summerside have processing plants for water. The water still comes from a well, I would think. So it goes through the processing plant and then gets sent to your house. What I said to Patty is just because you're on city water doesn't mean there's a bunch of holes or someone ran over a pipe or drove a stake into it, put an electrical conduit in, and you don't have contamination to the house if it's miles away. So in theory, it would probably be a good idea to test the water at the cottage by a third party to be safe. Good idea?
Good idea.
Let's move on.
Sounds good.
The next one is a little bit of a story. I had someone contact me via text to see a very expensive house, and usually I would have a very long, grueling interrogation to make sure that this person is qualified, has the money, everyone is there that's making the decision, they don't have a house to sell. The list goes on, because I want to make sure if this vendor or owner is preparing this house for a showing, particularly if it's a larger house and it's 3 or 4 or 10,000 square feet in the odd rare case in PEI, that they're putting that effort forth and rearranging their schedules and their agendas and taking the dog and making sure the kids aren't in the house, etc. for this showing. In this particular case, I was going to the house anyway and it's under renovation, so there's no staging involved. I just said, I'll meet you there tomorrow at noon. Got it all set up with the property manager. Everyone was super excited. I was pumped. This was the buyer for this house. Knowing full well I hadn't done any due diligence at all, but it really didn't matter because I was going to be there anyway. Turns out, texts me later and says, can I see it on another day? And I said, why is that? He said, because I have golf that day. Turned out it was a really nice day that day. That's why, in fact, I was going up to this beach house because it was a nice day. We're going to do some video and a bunch of other marketing materials. So this guy was just seeing this house as a form of entertainment on a day that previously it was supposed to rain, but now it's sunny, so he's going to his golf game. At the end of the day, I recommended he deal with a different agent because I was booked for the next week and a half. This other agent followed up, and then he ghosted her. What does this show you about the seriousness of this buyer and the potential to waste a vendor's very well-respected time and having them think the genuine buyer's coming over when it's just a guy looking for entertainment between golf games?
Well, and that's what we try to avoid as realtors, is making sure that any buyer is qualified prior to arranging a viewing on a property. So, yeah, that we do come across that where people they're here on vacation, they've got their activities booked, and they just want to get into a few properties so they know what kind of property can I get at X amount of dollars? Not that they probably had any intention, especially if they ghosted. My other question to you then is, was there a showing arranged at all for this property that maybe they went through even a different realtor?
No.
No,
that happens too. You just coincidentally get another real estate agent phone you that day for showing. You know it's the same guy because you didn't tell him what he wanted to hear, he or she.
Okay.
Moving on.
Okay.
I guess the point to that before we move on is if you are going to look at houses, make sure you're qualified for the respect of the owners of the houses or the properties. If you are just looking for entertainment, you want to see what things are worth, and maybe you want to see, $200,000 cottage versus a $500,000 or $1 million, be honest with the agent. He or she may have a bunch of empty houses they can put you through with the expectation you may buy in a year or 2 or 3 or 5. Just be honest. Okay?
Yeah, and that's what I say to realtors, and this is what perhaps the listeners, if they are a buyer or a seller, don't understand. This summer season is a great season for us to be really, really busy as realtors, but not make any money because we're dealing with a bunch of tire kickers. We play tour guide sometimes in the summer. I know in my early years I did before I brought them through my vigorous buyer's intake process as well to make sure that I was only dealing with qualified buyers, because I also have a life and I also have family that I would like to be able to justify. I was at work all day. I have earning potential because we don't get paid unless somebody buys or sells.
That's true. And someone had to pay for those horse-drawn carriages back then when you started in real estate.
Okay.
Next subject. I listed, Patty, a fabulous 32-acre parcel of land, waterfront. The only thing is, it's actually 3 parcels. One parcel's kind of like an island, the other parcel's kind of like a cape, and the other parcel's mainland. On our listing agreements, it asks how much water frontage is there. What do you put there?
Oh, that's a tricky one.
Not really. Do you have a survey?
If there's a survey, yes, but typically islands don't have surveys.
Typically, anything we list doesn't have a survey, and if it does, it's probably an old survey you can't go by. When you're dealing with a piece of waterfront or multiple pieces of waterfront, specifically an island or a cape, which are probably more prone to erosion, the acreage listed on the tax report and or the deed may not necessarily reconcile. So I left that spot blank.
Did you? Okay.
Well, if you don't,
yes,
you could put down the lowest number possible.
Okay.
But if I put down there's 32.8 acres and there's 4,000 feet of water frontage, and it turns out to be 24 acres and 800 feet of water frontage because we've got major erosion, now I've misrepresented the property, which will turn potentially into a lawsuit or somebody cutting a check. The point of this conversation is never, ever, ever in a listing agreement put down anything you're not 100% sure of and can't practically warranty that information is correct. Unless you had a survey done within the last 2-3 years, I wouldn't be guessing by going on to our many mapping systems how correct that information is.
Yes, I would just put on that you should have a disclaimer, disclosure within your property overview so that the buyer understands that this property has not been surveyed and that there is water frontage, it is acreage. And the only reason that would become an issue with the sale is if it's a non-island resident making the purchase, which you're allowed 5 acres of up to 5 acres or 165 feet of water frontage without going through the executive council for approval. So interesting. I've not heard anyone ever say that they've just left it blank, but I understand what you're saying from...
Well, I said leave it blank or put the absolute minimum quantifiable number down there.
Okay.
If you are absolutely 100% sure there's 1,000 feet of waterfront, put that number down.
Okay.
But don't put 1821 because someone in a deed 20 years ago thought that number was legitimate.
Okay, I have a question for you.
Question period is over.
So
is done.
I have had a client who the geo said, and again, there's two parts, the tax report and the geo map. The geo map said they had 32 acres or so, but the geo map, based on what they're being taxed, was 19.01. I put the 19.01 down, which is kind of in alignment with what you said, but my seller was so upset with me for taking that position that they ended up canceling the listing.
Well, you wouldn't have done that either.
And okay, so that's what I'm... So what would you have done?
I would have brought up the deed because all the other stuff is... Have you ever heard of the term babble blabble?
I get it.
So
it's all swampland.
But it doesn't matter what the geolink said. It doesn't matter what the government says on the ortho or whatever, the tax report. All that matters is what's on the deed. That is the golden document. And within that deed, it would have said it was 19 acres or whatever acres. However, if it's on the water, it may not be that amount. I bought 273 acres. I had it surveyed like a good little buyer. Turned out to be 240 acres.
This was on the water.
Go back to the deed. And then even the deed, if you bring up the ortho photo, you're going to see the erosion on the ortho because the property lines may be out in the water. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what this situation was partly too, on top of the swamp land.
Well, the swamp land is inclusive of the property, one would think. So the property size would be the same. You're not going to buy a property that's 20 acres and then they're going to say it's 20 acres, but then the deed says there's a swamp that's 2.6 acres. Now, when you survey it, the surveyor may delineate that, and if you are building on that property, and here's a handy little tidbit, that pond or swamp will have a 60-foot buffer all the way around it. Even if you have a stream and it's 3 inches wide, now you got 120 feet plus 3 inches of property you can't build on because this is now considered an environmental area.
I agree. I just feel, having dealt with thousands of buyers over the years, and this happened about 10 years ago, if I had put down 32 acres, a buyer would assume they have 32 acres.
You're fighting
land.
with, on one hand, you're trying to market the property and make it sound good, but on the other hand, you want to exonerate yourself from any potential legal liability.
Yes, yeah.
Right? And I understand. I've been there many, many times, probably within the last... In fact, I was there the last week over how much water frontage there was, and we did 6 different measurements, and everything was coming out different, so I ended up going with a minimum number, people aren't looking at the podcast we did last week and saying, well, it's 11,500 for an acre, and then it's X number of dollars per square inch or for an inch, linear inch on the water, and then saying we ripped them off and we owe the money in the form of an adjustment, right? And that's why you're trying to eliminate that liability.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you're going to go to an appraiser and say, what's an acre worth? Oh, it's worth 11,500 on this skewed appraisal.
Yeah, that's
right?
not how it works, but yeah.
Next question. Do I have to pay HST if you're not aware, if you're from the States or somewhere else on the planet? Maybe you're even from Quebec or Ontario. Your HST may be a different percentage. HST and PEI is a federal tax, stands for Harmonized Sales Tax. Canadian government created it when I was a kid to pay off the national debt. Guess what? Never did. Surprise, surprise.
Each province has their own tax amounts.
Right. So ours is 15%, and it may apply to agricultural properties. And this is the more important point. If you rent out your property, say as an Airbnb daily or weekly, this would be exclusive of monthly rentals, you would have to pay or have to charge 15% on that fee and submit it to the government. So HST is something you want to be cautious about. In the case where a property is, say, half agricultural and half swamp or forest, you'll have 2 different tax amounts, and you may have a different tax bill that usually ends in like a -01 or -02, which is very rare, but they do that. They will divide these properties for tax reasons.
Yes, and
Property tax reasons.
Property tax reasons. And why do they divide them for
So when you buy it, you pay HST on the agricultural land, which you need to determine a fair market value that is defendable when you're dealing with CRA. Because they're so busy paying off the national debt. You need this money.
The other thing for the owners, they get a bit of a tax break on the arable land because it's being farmed. So that's why somebody would register their property as farmland. But arable, so my question to you is, it is arable land, farmland. However, they're only cutting the hay off the top for their own use. They've not made an income from it. Is HST still applicable on that arable land?
I would have to consult my accountant. HST is very complex, but I would probably say it's a coin toss because it's not a commercial operation.
Yes, if they were renting it out 100%, but you're absolutely right. And you actually gave the right answer because we aren't accountants. And as our contracts say, any accounting, legal, or environmental advice should be deferred to the professional.
As does the Realtor Code.
As does the Realtor Code.
Do not pretend you're an accountant. Even if you have a blue suit and a briefcase, this does not make you a CPA. Okay. But you might be sharper looking. Another one I came across. Someone looking to buy some acreage, wants to divide it into a subdivision. What things do we need? What things do we need to look at that may be a challenge? Number one to me would be IRAC, Island Regulatory Appeals Commission. When someone buys property here and they have to go through IRAC, as we've previously discussed, and get approved, they may put on that property that it cannot be developed. It's identified. That's the word they use. So when we checked this on the IRAC database, which is irac.pe.ca, it was not identified. And then they wanted to divide it into 6 or 7 lots. You can only have 5 lots off a feeder street without getting into TPW, Transportation Public Works Standards, which could involve paved roads and water flow diagrams and all kinds of other stuff. That could turn your $30,000 project into $750,000. And it has in past things I've been involved with. So my advice in this particular case, and you can share with me, Patty, your advice, is just to divide it into 5 lots, be done with it. We already made sure it wasn't identified, and then go from there.
No, and you're absolutely right. Checking. And where do you find out if the property has been identified or not?
IRAC.pe.ca. You click on the left icon, which says property and lands, and then you go into the LPA database and you type in the PID number without the -000 in the end.
Yes, LPA, Land Protection Act, and PID, it's the parcel identification number. In a lot of cases, too, it's also registered with the deed, but not 100%.
Yeah, but that takes so much work. I can just go on the database and type in the number and it's done. And the other thing it shows me is it shows me previous applications and ones that have been denied and accepted. So it shows me a history as well. That's not going to be on your deed. All you're going to see on the deed is what you're going to see in the, the Gazette, which is another interesting point. If you're a really nosy Nelly and you want to know, no offense to Nelly, everything that's going on in PEI as far as business registration, IRAC applications, name changes, you can look at for free or subscribe to for a fee the Island Gazette. Are you one of those people that has to know everything?
No. I have combed through that. There is so much there. There's a lot there. There's a lot of information there, and sometimes you can come see some interesting facts or properties, but no, I don't usually have time for that.
Getting back to the subdivision, if they did want 10 lots, what could they do, assuming the land was configured in a way that allowed this? Add another feeder street.
Oh, another.
I'm doing mine here, but it doesn't work so well on a podcast. I was just pretending I was feeding myself. Add another feeder street. So if you have a long strip of land, let's assume it's a rectangle, just add multiple feeder streets off the main street. That will potentially give you the ability to have more than 5 lots subdivided. So if you see a really long stretch of white sandy beach that's, say, 3,000 or 4,000 feet long off a paved road, and it's 1,000 feet deep, this is just screaming subdivision.
Yeah. And would you do it in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3?
That is such a great question, Patty. You always phase, or the government phases subdivision. So if you have, say, a 200-acre parcel of land and you're going to develop a cottage subdivision, they typically want you to phase it 20 lots at a time and then have half of those lots sold off before you get authorization for phase 2. In some cases, there's monkey business being played, and they'll just take half of the lots and sell them to another corporation. But that was the rule the last time I looked. They're not going to give you the ability in a cottage subdivision. It may be different in the city, and probably is. But typically, they're phase things because they don't want a bunch of subdivisions out there with hundreds and hundreds or thousands of lots with nothing happening on them. Last question.
Okay.
How many times do you hear, especially since Realtor.ca now has a history record, which may or may not be correct, which will list previous sales and offerings, the question, this property has been on the market for a long time, Patty.
All the time. And I used to hear it a lot more often before COVID.
And what would a long time be on the island? Let's say before COVID and after COVID.
Before COVID and prior to our market taking off in 2016. So prior to 2016, a long time on the market would be over 12 to 18 months, because the average property in Summerside prior to 2015 took 12 to 18. The average property in Summerside prior to 2016 would take 12 to 18 months to sell. The average property in Charlottetown used to take 6 to 9 months to sell. So if you had a property in Charlottetown that was on the market for about a year or so, yes, that would be considered a long time back then. Fast forward to, after COVID, if the property is on the market, again, different price points though, so it's not just so black and white, and depending on the area, more than say 2 or 3 months, then perhaps that could, that's an average. If
a long time,
6 months,
a long time in PEI could be years.
That is, say, million plus, where we're traversing towards again, is probably going to take years again.
And to have a property on the market for 6 or 8, 9 months, a year and a half, chances are it's either inadequate, has lots of deficiencies, or more likely, most of the time, it's the price. Because anything will sell at the right price, even a dump. Well, I'm not going to say that. I was going to say crack house. But we don't have a lot of crack houses.
No, I've been in one, but yeah.
Yeah, but those will sell at the same at market value, because someone's going to take that crack house and renovate it, turn it into a nice new crack house.
I agree.
No, probably not. Renovate it, turn it into something nice. I think we're done in so many ways.
Yes, I feel so. To summarize the question, how the property being on the market for a long time, we do get asked that a lot. If this particular listing's been on the market for 60 days, there's always a history on Realtor.ca that allows us to go back and check, because they could have bounced around that particular seller to multiple agents, checking out, this agent, because they're looking for the miracle agent, which one is going to be able to tell me what I want to hear and, sell my property in the shortest time. So I do see that question a lot, and it's always fun to answer.
Oh, it's a super fun question. I really appreciate you being here as our co-host on this beautiful Charlottetown day, which would be a great day to go for a walk. And if you're not on the island, you have to get here and move to PEI forever, for your forever home, as they call it on the island. I appreciate everybody listening. We would really appreciate it if you want to see this content continue, that you follow or subscribe to the podcast, and also give us a review and a star rating. These seem to be like pulling teeth. Even the podcasts that have 100,000 downloads a month seem to have a hard time getting reviews, because most people are listening to this stuff on their mobile. But a review, a star rating, a subscription would be great. It costs you nothing, and it will keep Patty and I from being completely disgruntled and pulling the plug today.
Sounds good. No, we appreciate you. Have a great day and a great summer.